Okay, everybody, we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Mike Petrilli. I'm the president of the Thomas B. Fordham Institute, and I am excited to be the moderator for this great panel that we have today. It's called Quick Pivots, How Charters Adapt in Crisis. This is something that our friends at ExcelinEd put together, and is really going to be a chance for us to dig deep into how three excellent charter school networks are coping with this crisis. Some of the beginning of this story of putting this panel together came from a report that the Fordham Institute put out in August, looking at how several of these networks coped last spring. At the time we decided to do this report, we thought, look, we wanted to have down for the historical record, what these charter schools were up to and the amazing work that they did. We did not imagine at the time that there would still be so many places still doing full-time remote learning. But in fact, there are, including here where I am in Montgomery County, Maryland, where my kids have not been back to school since March. So some of those reports of ours and others like them that other groups have done have turned out to be very helpful as other schools have tried to improve their remote learning instruction this fall. But of course, we know that depending on where you are around the country, other schools are back in person, at least in some kind of hybrid setting. And so we're going to also talk about that, about how it's going this fall, about how these networks are addressing the challenges, what model they're using, and how it's going and what we might learn from that. So look forward to digging in. Those of you that are joining us watching live, I hope you'll get your questions ready. You can put those in the questions and answer chat. You can also chime in the room chat, and we will see that, and we'll get you into the conversation. Let me do very quick introductions. They are going to be quick because you can see their full bios online. But let me go through first, and I'm sure I'm going to butcher some names here, so I apologize in advance. But first, let's welcome Fernando Zulueta, the president of Academica. Fernando has been working in education for a long time and doing great in this network. Fernando, welcome to the panel.
Thank you, Michael.
And tell us a little bit about your network. Are you working, my understanding is mostly in Florida, but tell me if that's wrong.
I think yes, the largest presence in Florida, but we've been, I think we're in 8 or 9 states at this point. And then overseas, we have about 20,000 students in a online program we do called the International Dual Diploma Program. So great. It's, and we work with charter school networks. So we work with, I think it's 8 different networks, each one of them self-managed. We just support them.
Great. All right. Also, please welcome Tricia Noyola, Executive Director of IDEA Public Schools in Austin. Tricia, thanks so much for being on the panel.
Thank you so much for having me, Michael.
Yeah. And, IDEA, just one of the fastest growing networks out there in the country, if not the fastest growing network, based in Texas, but now expanding to other places as well. And from Austin, we may have to talk a little bit about your mayor at some point, Tricia. Just kidding. They're making national news for being a little bit of a hypocrite, but there's a lot of that going around.
It certainly is, yes.
There is. Okay. And then last but not least, we have Preston Smith, co-founder and CEO of Rocketship Public Schools. Preston, welcome to the panel.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Yeah, the Rocketeers are in California and Tennessee, and anywhere else at this point?
Milwaukee and DC.
That's right, Milwaukee.
So about 10,000 Rocketeers across the country.
Okay, very good. Well, super excited. I will say both Rocketship and IDEA were featured in our report about how folks coped last spring, but we're excited to hear, Fernando, from your experience as well with these different networks that you've worked with. So let's dive right in. Let's first talk about last spring, when suddenly it became clear that this pandemic was coming to our shores and was going to be a serious thing and was going to lead schools everywhere to shutter pretty much overnight. Remind us, how did it go for you in that crisis? How long did it take you to get things up and running? And what did remote school look like when it came to your cases? So let's start with you, Tricia. What did it look like there at IDEA?
Yeah, so I will never forget. I'm sure every one of us, especially on this panel, can probably remember where we were when we heard, and in our respective networks or the organizations we were working with when the decision was made to close down. And so at IDEA, where we were actually in our Texas schools, is we were about to start spring break. So when we initially went into planning, we knew we were going on spring break. And what we heard was, where there are concerns about COVID-19, so we're going to extend spring break for another week. So when we initially went into planning, we were thinking we're going to extend spring break. So lots of us didn't get a spring break, myself included. And we started making plans to take our instruction online. And what we were doing is we were ramping up for the week after spring break to completely prepare teachers and leaders so as to take all of our operations online the next week. So essentially give ourselves a 1 week runway to get it up and running. It became clear to us by the end of spring break that this would not be an extended spring break, that likely we were looking at an extended closure. So then we started looking at our training plans and our plans for instruction, and we knew we needed a longer term platform. So we were literally working into the evening, into the weekend to make sure that the platforms that we were going to use would be sustainable and fully integrated and would be able to support rolling out for the rest of the year, which we were able to do that. Luckily, the team at IDEA is incredible. And one of the best parts of being part of a large charter network that is incredibly nimble is we have some of the best people in the country working for us. And so we were able to design a world-class training and what I believe is an incredible distance learning platform that was fully integrated with all of our systems and ready to go within 2 weeks for our students to log on for live learning. And it is the same platform that we're actually using to this day. It wasn't pretty or flawless. There was a lot of prototyping that needed to be worked out, but I'm really proud of the pivot that we made and the amount of time it took us to get it off the ground.
Okay, wow, that is impressive, and it is. I remember when this first happened, the shutdowns. None of us knew how long this was going to be for, right? I mean, I remember hearing that Seattle was going to close for a month, and that just seemed crazy. I can't believe that. Oh, and then suddenly became clear that was going to be that was nothing compared to what was coming. Okay, lots more. I'm going to come back to you, Tricia, with some more questions about some of the other things going on at IDEA. But first, Preston, let's get in here. Tell us about those first days for you, and especially thinking about how to reach out to the families as they were going through various crises at the same time.
Yeah. So we officially closed our campuses. It was great. Friday the 13th. Of March, that was when it went down. And we had watched it across the country because we're in multiple states. So states were doing different things. And so it was really trying to kind of navigate that. I would say that the big thing for us, Michael, what I was really struck by was we were preparing a couple weeks in advance. We foresaw closures. And a lot of the conversation at that time was from schools was how was the work going to get done? How was the work going to get home? And I remember saying to our team, like, that's not the point of schools. That's not the point of our school. Like, it's not about work. It's about culture. It's about community. It's about what our Rocketship community and core is. And when we have launch, our morning assembly every day and celebrate kids and dance and have our core values and our creed, and when we have our recess at lunch and how we have social emotional learning in the classroom, right? It's like it's yes, we want achievement, but we really wanted that stability and love and joy and culture. And so that's what I really challenged the team with those 2 weeks prior. I said, we'll figure out the work, right? We can figure that out. Google Classroom, Zoom, we have our Rocketship goals or jetpack. Like we've got this, but the real art is how do we bring our community and our culture and translate that? And that's really what we were obsessed with. So we were ready. March 16th, that Monday, we had professional development for our staff, and we launched on the 17th. And really, it's evolved since then, but really launched with Facebook, with Google Classroom, all the things I talked about. And the big, and we had lunch. We had lunch that morning, and our kids dancing and celebrating. We had landing that afternoon, celebrating kids who hit their goals. We had live read-alouds at night so our kids could get bedtime stories, right? Having that consistency, the routines, the safety in this crisis, right? And to your point, Michael, one of the big things we learned, this box is back on me, getting an echo. One of the big things we learned was around the needs of our families. So even connecting them on the internet, how do you navigate Comcast? How do you make that call? How do you navigate your landlord who won't let you install Comcast even though it's free right now, right? How do you get rent assistance? How do you get food? How do you do all these things? And so we started something called CareCore, which was essentially teams within our school teams whose sole job was to reach out to families daily, understand their needs, teach them how to navigate systems, help them access these resources. And so really trying to create this culture of care and community and well-being for our families, for our kids, as well as for our teachers, building in well-being and self-care times into their core schedules. Because the trauma, the stress, just really trying to help everyone navigate that from day one and really hold on to our culture, our core values, and our culture of community and relationships.
Which is, I mean, it's all incredible work. Meanwhile, there were a lot of places, a lot of schools, certainly in the traditional public school sector, but I'm sure in charters, private schools, that just couldn't even find the kids, right? I mean, we had all these stories about kids that just went missing. And families that went missing, especially if they didn't have internet access, there was no way to find them. People had to go out and start knocking on doors. I mean, did you have those kinds of challenges, or were you able to get in touch with families pretty quickly?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, as context, probably 80% of our students are low-income students. So this is our community. At one of our DC schools, a third of our students in a school are homeless. So this was our preparation, Michael, as context. During those 2 weeks prior to shutdown, we were already hustling with Comcast and other Spectrum, connecting families, distributing Chromebooks. We set up a daily survey via text. That was huge, so we could get in touch with families, we could help them navigate needs. And to your point, Michael, being closed in for some of us has been a great blessing. But for many of our families, being locked in, they're sharing a home with 6, 7, 8 families. They're not always great homes, and not always all at their fault, right? So us immediately being able to kind of continue with that culture of care, the check-ins, we were shelter in place, so we couldn't knock on doors, right? So it really was those texts, those calls, and I would say the foundation of the relationships. We do home visits, we have cafecitos, we have community meetings. Like, we know our families really well and they trust us. And so having that foundation was massively important, because in their times of crisis, they were much more open with us what their needs were, and it made it much more possible for us to support our kids and families in our efforts.
That's huge. That's huge. Okay, we're going to talk more about that as well. All right, let's get to Fernando. Let's get you in here. Tell us, maybe from one or two of the networks that you worked with last spring, what that was like.
Well, we had a similar experience to what Preston and Tricia were mentioning. We saw it coming because we saw what was happening in Europe. We have like a large group of students learning with us in Europe, and Italy shut down at the beginning of March, and at the end of February, part of some schools in Italy were already shutting down. So our students over there were telling us what was happening, and what we did was, the first thing was, we were really worried about making sure everybody would be connected when we ultimately would shut down, if we shut down here in the States. So we did a survey. We started surveying everybody in February and March, all the families, to make sure they had connectivity and devices. And if they did it, we began the process of of handing those out and connecting them to make sure everyone had a way to stay online once we went on remote live instruction, which is what we did. We were already working on a platform, on a custom platform we were developing to keep everyone connected. So we just put that on the forefront, and we developed this platform. We call it Collegia, and it's a communications platform as well as, a learning platform for everyone. And what it did is it allowed us to have one secure, safe, single sign-on solution for every family that we work with. So we were able, March 16th, when we opened back, we were notified of the shutdown on the 13th, and then on the 16th, over that weekend, we trained about 5,000 teachers. And on using the platform, we trained, before them, we had about 200 administrators learn how to use it. And then we went live with about 65,000 students on Monday. And then we added, others were already on spring break, thank God. And then we went adding over the next week or two the remaining group. So in about a span of 2 weeks, we were able to get everyone on using the same tool. So that makes it really easy. And it's easy. It's sort of like how it works here with this conference, that you can just click on your schedule and you see, and you can attend the sessions. We did that. That's how part of that works. And we had over 100,000 students on after 2 weeks. So it was very, it worked. And our attendance, which was ironic, we ended up with higher attendance levels than we had in brick and mortar. So in some schools, we were getting daily attendance. We had actually some of the authorizers call and say, hey, we think there's something wrong with your data because you're reporting higher attendance numbers than you were when you were brick and mortar. And it was like, no, that's what's happening. It's easy for the kids to log on. Not easy for everyone, mind you.
Mm-hmm.
And that was part of it. Was we didn't have necessarily a shelter in place situation. So we were able to get folks out even in the field and go into many of the low-income neighborhoods we work with, families we work with, to make sure that we coaxed them into going back online. In some cases that they had elected not to, let's say, log in. But eventually we were able to get the numbers really, where we needed them. And that was a relief.
That's great. Well, let's talk now about some of the instructional approaches that you had, again, last spring, and maybe some of this is carried over to the extent that you're still doing remote learning this fall. But, we saw, again, lots of schools, were barely doing an hour or two of instruction. Many of them waived grading student work or went to a pass-fail system. In our analysis, we found that many of these high-performing charter networks went the other way, right? They really tried to maintain a regular school day as much as possible, maintain the same high expectations in terms of student work and grading, and so it still felt like school. So I'm just curious, how did you handle some of those things, and did you see any particular innovations around how you taught and how you had your teachers teach over this crazy new modality, right? I mean, was there more team teaching? Was there more self-directed learning? How did that all play out? Why don't we start with you, Preston?
Yeah, great question, Michael. I was actually, when it started, I was fortunate because I was a parent of a Rocketeer. My daughter was in 4th grade, so I got to see everything up close and personal. She's now in middle school, at KIP, but that was a real blessing. I got to see the program up front and really be more informed. And we initially started with Google Classroom, Facebook, other sort of tools, but have migrated over time, especially in starting this year with Zoom and more live teaching. We started piloting that in the spring, and we had already been piloting that, fortunately, within the network for other reasons in the school year. So we had some experience and started doing Pear Deck and other sort of things to launch this school year. But I think the biggest thing, Michael, that we saw, we were really excited. March 17th, we launched. We ended that Friday. We had done a lot of great work. We were felt good about community. We'd done check-ins, care core, helping our families. We were feeling really good. And we have this tool internally called Jetpack, which allows us to daily look at our online learning programs, which are integrated into our curricula. They're personalized, multiple programs, really cool tool where we can see all the programs, one-stop shop. It's really great. We've developed it internally, went online and checked it out on Friday, and our completion of program and work was just abysmal. And it was a real flag that in this environment, the level of support and coaching and check-ins that our kids and families needed, especially in a shelter in place, in DC, Milwaukee, California, and Nashville, they had all gone to that. So we started doing daily check-ins, and through Jetpack, because of that tool, we were able to see daily, so which kids were on, which kids were doing their work, in addition to just attending class, but really just doing work and engaging. What did they need? Where are they getting stuck? Where do we coach them? And so we were able to do that and able to respond. And through the spring, we actually doubled our work completion, what we had been realizing prior to COVID. And so that was probably the biggest innovation, and led to, I think, some really strong outcomes for our Rocketeers.
That's great to be able to react like that. And again, what comes through clear, especially with the Rocketship story, is that you were relatively well positioned for something like this. I mean, first of all, because you had great relationships with your families, huge, most important thing. And then that you did have a model that had a big technology component. So, versus maybe some other schools that didn't have as much familiarity with that, you were able to flip a switch somewhat more likely. But again, it still took some work, right? It wasn't like the kids just right away were then doing everything you asked them to do right away. You needed to solve a bunch of problems. You could look at the data in real time and address it, which is all the stuff we've been talking about for years, and is happening.
Yeah, it's funny though, Michael, because our kids are all elementary, right? So 4 to 10-year-old, they're great. But in this environment, think about the stress. Their first instinct is, I got to log on and do my work. And second, they know how to do it, but their parents may not. So it was training our parents of like, how do the parents log onto the Zoom to join the Cafecito? How do the parents know how to log on to Jetpack? How to log on to Google Classroom? So I would say what we actually probably innovated and learned on more rapidly, we needed to train our parents. We needed professional development for our parents on how to support their kids. And we had to kind of help in that area so we could just get our kids to access stuff, and then we could help manage it. But we actually needed our parents to really become much more sophisticated on technology.
I remember those early days. I was like, wow, okay, my job now seems to be tech support. That's what I do in my house. I mean, that eventually worked itself out, but that's a big issue. Absolutely. And for some of us that work on laptops all the time, but a lot of parents don't. And that was an issue. Tricia, tell us from your perspective, some of those new instructional models. Did you basically just try to take what was working in the classroom and just transfer it to Zoom, or was there anything new that you tried in the classroom?
Yeah, so the fundamentals of what makes IDEA Public Schools great is that we ensure that every single student is learning every single day. We measure it, we take data, and we respond to it. And so I would say those things actually translate really well to a virtual learning environment. The methods, though, by which you do that can look really different. So I think some things that we've tried that have worked out really well, and that this new era of learning have lent itself really well to, is Pear Deck. So something we've used with kindergartners through our 12th graders is making sure every single day our students log onto Microsoft Teams, which is the platform that we use, and we integrate everything through there. And so our students aren't just, listening to a teacher or watching a teacher. They have something that they're always doing, that they're entering a response, they're working out a problem, they're recording something, which is what we would do in a classroom live. And a teacher would be walking around and looking at their work and giving students feedback. So that's what we're doing when we're virtually teaching as well. We're doing the exact same thing. Some of the other things that we're doing that are yielding great results for kids, is especially for our younger learners, is we're using a platform called Imagine Learning, specifically their literacy component, because what we found is for our youngest students. We really worried about their language and literacy skills and how they were falling behind, particularly during the shutdown in the spring. And so we found a way for them to digitally practice, and it's individualized for them. And we get that data every single day, and we are able to, make sure we're checking in with kids, encouraging them, making sure they know this is how much practice you need to do, holding them accountable to doing it, encouraging them, and setting goals and benchmarks with them, which, works for any kid. The other thing, the other components that are really strong is our college prep students. What I found was really interesting is they have actually really thrived with many aspects of this learning. So in the shutdown in the spring, I was really concerned because we, of course, have a goal that we want 100% of our students across the network to matriculate to college, and we want 30% of our students to be advanced placement scholars. It's a very ambitious goal. I wasn't an AP scholar, and that's, that's tough. And it's a goal we've had as a network, and we've actually always fallen a little bit short. And so during the pandemic, of course, not being able to see our students in person, not being able to really motivate them, and also having our kids do online AP tests, we were like, I don't really know how this is going to go. And we actually had our best AP performance yet. We actually hit the 30% AP scholar goal. And we actually hit 100% of our students matriculating to college during a pandemic. And so I think that speaks to a few things. One, our kids are incredible. I mean, we knew that, right? But two is that the components of what makes IDEA great are going to make IDEA great no matter what, in any environment. And three is the individualized aspects of a lot of the digital components of what we have going now during the pandemic can really lend themselves to helping our students, especially sometimes our most struggling students. If we can leverage those personal relationships that we have with kids and families, we can actually use those to our benefit. And to the point you were talking about earlier about like relationships with families and keeping track of students, we set a goal as soon as the pandemic started. The nightmare that was keeping us up was we don't want to lose students. We don't want to lose track of students, and we don't want students and families to withdraw from IDEA because they say, this is too hard, this is too challenging, and I just don't want to do this. And so we actually had 96% of our students persist at IDEA Public Schools from when the pandemic started to the first day of school. And so I think, again, posting strong academic results, keeping our students at IDEA, and being able to innovate on what makes us great in person, also making us great online and helping us serve all students. Yes, it's really hard, but I think our teachers and our leaders have been able to find ways to make sure every single one of our students is successful.
All right, that's fantastic. All right, well, let's turn the page now and talk about this year. I'm super excited because I don't know the answer. I knew a little bit about the answers to last spring. I don't know what you're going to say about how things are going this fall. We know things are playing out so differently in different parts of the country and, of course, across different sectors in our education system. So let's hear it. Are your kids back? Are you doing part-time hybrid? Are we doing full-time remote? Are we in some weeks and then back out again because the spike that we're seeing right now? What's happening? Let's go to you, Fernando, first.
Thank you, Michael. This start of the year was special. It was actually harder to start the year than to do the spring semester, because in the spring, at least, we all went remote live instruction. So everybody was remote. Whereas to start the new school year, everyone's in some form of a hybrid model. And that means, some students are in school and some students are studying from home. So what we had to do was figure out how to do that without having to, change the entire system altogether. We wanted it to be as normal as possible. We did that in the spring by doing all instruction was remote, live, full daily schedule, 6 hours per day. Everyone was going to school following the regular bell schedule, so that made it real convenient and familiar for every student. What we did is through the summer, we went back and retrofit over 2,000 classrooms to put in technology so we could have students elect either to be in class or to come in from home digitally. So that's what we've done. And so what that means is the classrooms, most of the classrooms that we work with, you have students physically in the classroom, as well as two large screens, one in the front and one in the back of the classroom, where students can come in, can join digitally using whichever video conferencing software their network elects to use. We're agnostic as to which software. We're using predominantly Zoom, but they can use any one that they wish, using the same platform, which is the Collegia one that we work with. And what's I think where it's been toughest is on the teaching staff. Actually, the students have adapted remarkably well. They actually, seem to thrive in this environment where they can be in the classroom, or if they elect to and can't be in the classroom for some reason, they can just attend from home. That puts an additional burden on the teachers because they need to simultaneously during the school day while they're teaching, they need to be mindful not only of the students that they have sitting in front of them, but also the ones that are attending from home. And it has been very difficult for many of them. We've supported them. We've had training sessions for them, and we have found some teachers that just rise to the occasion who that wasn't a problem and who thrive in that environment as well. So we've tried to identify as many of those as possible to help them become mentors and model for teachers who struggle with that modality. But aside from that, it's the biggest challenge was that technically figuring out how to make the classroom work. We collaborated with Samsung and used a lot of their equipment in the classroom as far as the screens, and then we use the tracking cameras so that the teachers could walk around the room and the students who are home could still follow, and then just really good quality microphone in every classroom that would screen out some of the noise so that the students at home could listen. And that's made it, that's really made it very, very very pleasant for the families. Those folks who, for whatever reason, don't feel comfortable having their children in a classroom setting because they themselves are vulnerable or they have members of their families who are, their children can still attend online and without missing anything as far as the instructional day.
I love it. And of course, I'm so curious if those cameras and the microphones, if that's all going to get to stay after this pandemic, right? You imagine kids who are homesick could be following along from their couch, could be a powerful tool in teacher evaluation. Not sure how the teachers will feel about that, or maybe we do know how they're going to feel about that.
They're actually
powerful.
I think they're happy with it. And to give you an idea, that's exactly the plan, is to keep it because it's worked out so well, and students are really happy, and families. We've had an outpouring of just gratitude from the parents that are really happy that even if their child has the sniffles, they can stay home. They have a fever, whatever. It doesn't have to be COVID-19. It's just they're sick or not feeling well, and they can still attend class and they can still be present. We built in survey tools into the whole platform. So we were able, last semester, for example, in a span of 2 days, we were able to get 112,000 students to rate their teachers, to give us feedback, not for so that we could then have a tool to the administrators at each school could then sit with their instructors and discuss what were their strengths and weaknesses based on what their students that were with them in class felt. So using these digital tools, we've been able to actually improve our communication with the families we work with and with the students, and they feel a greater sense of engagement in many cases, and the ability to participate in the process, and give feedback, that we can use to make their experience better at school.
Great, but exhausting for the teachers.
Yes.
No doubt. All right. Oh, I was going to go to Tricia, and I just she keeps popping out there. We'll let her come back. So Preston, what about for you? Are you back in person? Does this look different in different places?
It looks different in different places, Michael. So for the most part, we have small groups. Right now, we've really tried to prioritize our most vulnerable students, both based on the data, students with special needs. So we've really tried to prioritize which kids really need a safe place, need reliable internet, need the social interaction, or just need the learning in person. So that's how we've been prioritizing things. I would say we've also really been working to listen. This has really been kind of, I would say, a lesson in decentralization of, Fernando talked about it. There's so many unique needs from each family to each teacher to each child. And so really, parent surveys, teacher surveys, listening to where they're at. And so we've really kind of school by school been trying to best address the needs and the interests of our families, like who really needs to come back, wants to come back versus doesn't. And so really been focused on that. I'd also highlight we've really invested more time on social emotional learning. I think there's a lot of research out there after traumatic events, internationally or domestically, that really helping students with social emotional learning helps them then better engage in their actual learning. And so we've really been prioritizing that within our daily bell schedule as well, and just trying to get our kids to talk and interact more in this environment.
So help us understand, Preston. So, you did not try to get then everybody back, part-time, just focused on the kids who needed it most. Why'd you go that route? What was the decision there?
Yeah, to be clear, Michael, we worked hard. I don't think we've done anything harder as an organization from probably April to July to get ready to open. We were gearing up for hybrid, all the safety protocols, how we were going to adopt our model. I would say we were ready, or as ready as probably anybody could be. But if we remember the summer, there were some comments made, and it was pretty clear that within California, that was kind of the first shoe to drop with us. They didn't open. Then it was DC, then it was Milwaukee, and finally Nashville. So within all of our locations at the start of this school year, it wasn't an option. And that's when we pivoted back into our remote and have been gradually working towards small groups. I'd name, in this listening campaign, it's been interesting to me. We have daycare and YMCA and other partners at some of our schools. And we thought initially in August, a lot of families would demand that. There'd be high demand. They'd really want back. And that just hasn't been the case at many of our locations. So we've really seen a regional effect of like how your region interprets COVID, the safety of coming back really affects things. And so demand has been really, really minor to gradual, especially I would flag in California and DC, and definitely based on the saturation in Wisconsin right now.
Yeah, it's not surprising. And I do find it interesting. I've been curious if any schools out there feel like they want to try to talk their parents into sending their kids to school because of the educational benefits, or if it's just, of course we can all appreciate why parents want to be cautious. And so you don't want to second guess them either. That seems like a tough one. Tricia, what about you? What about an idea? Are you guys, you in, you out, you both?
We're both. So I think, what Fernando talked about really resonates with me. So in Texas specifically, where most of our schools are located, and also in Louisiana, it is parent choice. So in Texas specifically, there are no limits. So parents can opt to have their kids come physically to the building 5 days a week. They could opt to have their kids come to the building 1 to 2 days a week. So there are no limits. And also it's parent choice 100% of the time. So I have 4 children myself. 3 of them are IDEA students. And so at any time, my 3 kiddos can go to school, but if they have a stuffy nose, or, as they are wont to do, then they can stay at home and do distance learning that day. I would reiterate what Preston said. The percentage of students going in person in our various regions depends very much on the perceptions of COVID in that region, and also how really what parents want for their kids. I'd also say it really depends on the age of students. So let me give you some examples. So at our academies, at our elementary schools, I have right now anywhere from 62% of kids attending in person, down to 25% attending in person. So I definitely see far more demand with younger students and families with younger students than I do with middle school and high school students. I will say we spent all summer vigorously preparing to open in person, and we've made a strong push for in-person instruction. My 3 kids are attending in person. That is what I want for our students. And I would say, particularly when I look at student achievement data every single week, there is a huge discrepancy between our students who are attending school in person and our students who are attending school virtually. And do I think that, part of that has to do with do we definitely need to improve our online learning and pedagogy? Absolutely. But I also think that there is, just a lot to be said for the in-person learning environment. And with, 90% of our students being free and reduced lunch students who qualify for free and reduced lunch, I think our students really benefit from being in our learning environments. And so a lot of our leaders, especially for our most vulnerable students or our students who are the furthest academically behind, have respectfully made pushes for those families to really consider bringing students in person when they feel like it would really benefit. And actually families have been really receptive to that.
That's interesting.
And for the most part, they've been really excited when they've brought their kids back in person and been really satisfied.
So I just want to make sure I'm clear on this. So both for IDEA and for some of these networks, Fernando, that you're working with, is it fair to say that if 100% of families wanted their kids back, you would take them 5 days a week? You're not putting limits on it to allow for social distancing per se, or?
We can't, actually.
Okay.
It depends on in some locations, yes, but in other locations, you still have situations depending on the positivity rate in that community. You have situations where you can only have perhaps half the students physically present. So we're not out of the woods yet. Although I would strongly recommend that people revisit that whole narrative, because I think it's flawed. I think what we've seen is that the cases don't originate in the schools. That it's actually it's from the adults are the ones that are by and large getting infected during the weekends, let's say, and not or at when they go back home. It's not at school where we're seeing any significant amount of transmission. And I think the students definitely are better off. And if it were mine to decide, I would say yes. If they're able to physically go to school and want to, the parents elect for them to go, they should definitely be able to. And by the way, we should offer the option, as long as you have the ability to do so, they should also be able to log in from home. So that should really be a family choice. I don't think, I think we're past the point where it needs to be the government's decision at this point.
Well, and we were chatting before this that, we think that there's European countries where they've got all the kids in person 5 days a week, right? And they're not having outbreaks at the school level. Tricia?
Yeah, no, I was going to say in Texas, with the exception of El Paso that has a waiver from the Texas Education Agency, you actually cannot limit in-person instruction. So we can't limit. So yes, if 100% of parents, showed up and said, I want my students in the building, we would, let them in. And, in some case, particularly with our kindergarten and first graders, I wish they would, because that's, I think there's I think what we will see at the end of this is that, and even if you looked at the news story on CNN, our youngest students have paid a disproportionate price for this. And they are not who was spreading any of this in the first place. So I think we need to take a really hard look at what we're doing and whether it actually squares up with public health.
Yep. Very, very well said. All right, let's get a couple of the questions here from the chat, from the audience. Let me put two of them out there, and you all can decide if you want to answer either one. One is the question of teacher morale. How's that going? Fernando talked a little bit about that. The second one is English language learners. Have you found anything that has worked well for your English language learners throughout this challenge? So, who wants to go first? Tricia? You're still on mute.
I'll take the English language learners question. So I think one of the best things that we've seen with using Microsoft Teams and Pear Deck specifically is that we can do a couple of things. One of the things that we can do is we can automatically caption ourselves as we're speaking. So something that you wouldn't necessarily do as you're, live teaching a class is you wouldn't necessarily have a running script behind you that was literally captioning what you were saying or have the ability to translate that. We can do that within Microsoft Teams. So what's been amazing for our English language learners is, one, they're able to see live text of what the teacher is saying. Two, they can actually pause it or slow it down. And three, they can actually translate it. So that's been great for our students and also great for our parents when they are reviewing it later to be able to help their students with their work. So I think that's been really incredible. And then two, I think something that I can't stop speaking enough about is there are just so many incredible adaptive online platforms now that our kids can have access to that are iterative. They can log onto them and get incredible language practice that don't require a lot of teacher prep, that don't require a lot of, just a lot of necessarily even platforms for districts to adopt that can be easily pushed out to students and families that have been real lifesavers for us in this pandemic, particularly for our language learners. And that's been helpful for us too, for families that really want to know what's the additional practice that I can do with my child to make sure that they're really advancing in their language skills. So those are two things that really come to mind when I think about ways that we've been able to really support our language learners.
Yeah, that's awesome. And the captioning I hadn't thought about that. That's super cool. Very interesting. Preston, you want to weigh in on either of these?
Yeah, I thought Tricia handled the ELL one really well. So I'll talk about teacher morale. I actually think the previous conversation about demand and parents and families, we never talked about teachers. And I would say for us, we've really tried to approach it with their health and safety also and their well-being first and foremost. Even on the teachers, coming back isn't an easy answer for some of them, right? What about my children and daycare? What about if I've got an elderly person with me, right? And putting people at risk. So we've really worked hard to try to listen, to understand their needs, to create self-care and well-being time as part of their schedule. Right, they've got you were talking about earlier, the IT coordinator at home, right? There's a lot of things that our teachers are having to do in addition to teach. And so how do we really honor them and meet their needs? And even in this conversation I was talking about earlier, coming back, how do they plan that with us? Who's ready to opt in? Who has different conditions, and honoring their choice, right? It doesn't mean one group is more or less mission oriented. It's, both have really valid things here. So we've really, I'll say it's hard. It's really hard. Our teachers are having to relearn their art of teaching. They're having to prioritize, which means deprioritize content because we just have less time. They're having to make trade-offs around content versus depth of pedagogy. There's some real, and they're having to deal with what we're all dealing with, being at home and very different environments. So it's hard, but we're really, I would say, self-care, trying to listen, really appreciate them, celebrate with them. And our teachers and team are just doing incredible work and just really constantly trying to remind them of that, but also just honor their choices around this. And I would say, like, I totally agree with Fernando and Tricia around wanting kids back, but I would also question of, like, is that really the most optimal model right now when you have the toxic stress and the fear and other things with kids and teachers coming back? Like, Maslow's hierarchy of needs demonstrate that, like, we're asking people to operate at a very high level of thinking, and yet if you're fearing for your safety at the same time, it's probably not optimal learning conditions. So I do think, like, we really need to, like, grapple with, like, how do we have consistency? We were talking about Europe. They're much more consistent about mitigation strategies, and we're not in this country. Their healthcare is very different, and for the populations we serve at Rocketship, we've had more families, parents die in the past 9 months we've ever seen. We've had more students die this year, and not of COVID, but of, like, right, families are under toxic stress and sometimes making poor decisions and other things. So this has been very traumatic, and I would just say, like, I'm all for our kids going back, but we also need to really have an honest conversation as a country about how do we make that more feasible, especially for our kids and families who are dying and being affected at a disproportionate rate than other families and communities in this country.
I'm so sorry to hear that, Preston. It is an important reminder about just how awful this crisis is. Let me ask one last question before we close out. There's so many things I'd love to ask about. I'm curious, for example, as you think ahead to vaccines and how that's going to play out in your communities. Are you going to require kids to get those vaccines before they come back? Or when do we think we're going to be able to safely be back in person, full time? But let me instead go in this direction. When you think about everything that's happened in the last year, what are some of the innovations that you think you'll stick with even when this pandemic is over? We've talked a little bit, Fernando, about being able to stream classes live to kids who are sick at home on the couch. Tricia too. What else do you think you'll stick with after all of this?
I think using a digital tool to keep everyone connected, and not just for the purpose of being able to go to class when they're home, but also just to keep an entire organization working together. And it's been really helpful. I mean, look, sometimes you can actually get more work done by attending, and meeting with more people. It's not entirely a substitute for in-person meetings, but I got to tell you, it makes commuting from meeting to meeting a lot more effective. And then there's tools, being able to survey your stakeholders. I think we've developed these tools now that make it a whole lot easier and faster and convenient, and everybody's now using the same tools and becoming familiar with them. So I think those are good, winning strategies, and one of the things we do need to make sure coming out of this and into the future is that we don't have a digital divide between the rich and the poor. We need to make sure that every family, low-income families, especially have access to the same tools and the same devices that well-to-do ones have, because that's where a lot of the learning is migrating to. And I think going forward, it's really important. I don't think it's any less important than, just like we give low-income families access to free and reduced lunch. I think and I know we have E-rate and some of these other programs, but I think we need to make it they need to go hand in hand. If you qualify for free lunch, you should also qualify for free data plans for your children. I'm not talking about everyone having a free phone for any use, but certainly for educational use, there really should be no barrier.
Yeah. All right, good. All right, Tricia, Preston, maybe 2 minutes each. What are we going to stick with after all this?
Yeah, what I believe we will certainly stick with is this idea that there are so many different ways that our students can show mastery, meaning that, in the past idea, we've been super reliant on like paper pencil. We've really prided ourselves on being really old school, and we didn't really have a choice. We really got thrust into the digital age. But now we've really seen the benefits of all of the amazing ways that our students can practice, that they can discover, that they can show mastery, that they can go deeper, that we can give our kids feedback in more meaningful ways. So that's, as a parent and as a leader, that's what I most want to stick around, because that's what I believe will enhance our students' experience and make them even more prepared for college and beyond.
Excellent. Great. Preston?
Yeah, I would say our Care Core approach, having that internal team to help families navigate resources and access them, that's been a big emphasized learning. I think we're going to try to continue that. Jetpack, that tool to better manage personalized individualized online learning. We think for homework and even sharing it with others around how to supplement tutoring and after school programs, I think could be a huge win for a lot of kids across this country. And then it's really pushed us to share as an organization. So at our website, we've got our teacher professional development and our distance learning launchpad. So I think we're going to continue to really try to share and learn from others. And this has definitely pushed us in that direction.
All right. Well, this is really inspiring. I saw Ralph. Thanks for the comment about this being an incredible presentation. I agree wholeheartedly. It is always inspiring to be with educators who are on the ground, or whatever the ground is these days when we're doing remote learning as well, but making it happen and serving families that, as we've been reminded, are really suffering right now and going through so much, and yet making it happen in terms of learning those important skills, as well as providing all that support to families, emotional and otherwise. We look forward to seeing how it goes in the next few weeks and months, and we certainly all look forward to the pandemic being over, now that we can see some light at the end of the tunnel. So thank you again, Preston, Fernando, Tricia. Thank you so much for your great comments. All of you joining us, thank you for joining us. If you're watching live, we've got, I think, the last set of sessions starting at 4:15 Eastern. Please do tell your friends and family about this presentation, that they might want to catch it after the fact on demand. And otherwise, I'm signing off. Thanks so much, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.